Hi, I'm Dave Himel Bros Leather. We're a bespoke leather jacket maker in Toronto, Canada. We do custom leather jackets, sort of historically based. If you like this video, follow us on Instagram, it's Himel Bros, or on our YouTube channel, Himel Bros Leather. So today I'm going to talk about the art of my project in making leather jackets. For over a decade, I was an artist, designer of textiles and painting, fabric, and drawing. And one of the reasons that I got into the leather jacket making and designing was the design part versus the vintage part. So the vintage part was an important component in why I got into this, but the design part was also a very important component. I needed an outlet to express my creativity, and today I'm going to talk about a jacket that I designed, which was the Excelsior jacket. Now, I already have an extensive video about the design of the Excelsior jacket, but in this case what I'm going to talk about is customization. So customization has a long history with regard to leather jackets. The motorcycle jacket, one of the primary genres of leather jacket, sort of rose up out of a long history of military leather jackets and the rise of the motorcycle and the automobile, and the aircraft. There was a lot of what we would call adventure involved in the world of the leather jacket in its early days. It was a work jacket that was converted and utilized from the military to adventure sports, and a lot of those people that participated in those early adventure sports came out of the military, and they came out of World War I and World War II. One of the interesting historical trends that you see of these people that were living relatively horrific and dangerous experiences. World War I, the Great War, was one of mass military mobilization and slaughter, and the first air forces were used, bombing, and aircraft were a highly dangerous machine at that time. Is that after the war, you saw this rise in people who just didn't give a fuck. They were literally like, I don't care if I die. I crawled over piles of dead bodies, so I'm gonna climb Everest, or I'm gonna ride a motorcycle across farm fields from Alaska to Newfoundland, or I'm gonna go as fast as humanly possible, and if I die or my buddy dies, I don't really give a rat's ass. So part of that process of being a stunt flyer or a motorcycle rider or a car racer was to take those leather jackets that you wore in the military and to use them in your civilian life as an adventurer. So a lot of the leather jacket companies, especially the early ones, would produce jackets in genres. They would make a uniform for the fire department. They would make a motorcycle jacket. They would make a work jacket. They would make a casual jacket. They would make all the school or stadium jackets for their local college, university, or high school. And a lot of these companies rose out of nothing. Small little shop, immigrant sewing machine. Maybe they were a glove maker. Maybe they were trained in some other area, but they filled that new niche in America and Canada of the leather jacket as part of a uniform. So imagine you're a military guy and you got out of the early Air Force and now you were a motorcycle rider or a pilot or a crop duster, and your military leather jacket or your sheepskin jacket or whatever you wore in the military was now your adventure jacket. In the military, there's a long tradition of insignia and emblem. You would have your squadron, your division, your various patches, and especially in the Air Force, there was a long tradition of customizing those patches with graphic images pulled from popular culture. So animations, Disney, Warner's, a lot of those, the Fleischers, Betty Boop, Popeye, Bugs Bunny, a lot of those images got incorporated into logo and insignia. Everybody knows about the aircraft where people would hand paint their missions and their logos on the side of aircraft. Well, similarly, they would do the same thing with leather jackets. So you get a great tradition of the A1 and A2 jacket with custom paint, custom patches, handmade patches of your squadron, artwork on the back. They would draw from things like the pinup artist Varga, cartoons, animation. So that's one area of customization, and that translated into motorcycle clubs after World War II, where you have most famous examples of the Hells Angels that drew some of their members and their inspiration out of a bomber squadron. You have examples of many motorcycle clubs customizing their own club colors, not necessarily nefariously, but just more as, I'm part of a motorcycle club and we need our own colors. And that, of course, translates down the road through the 50s and 60s into chain-stitch motorcycle club patches. These were what we call motorcycle cuts, which were customized, hand embroidered and assembled images for your motorcycle club that you would sew on your jean jacket or your leather jacket. We have other traditions of painting on leather jackets directly, both from the military and then later in civilian life, or adding custom spots, metal studs onto those jackets. So all those traditions make for very interesting historical variations of leather jackets, and certainly the most valuable vintage jackets would have been collected, customized, and very unique artifacts, either militarily or motorcycle clubby or college-y. And it's those customizations that designers often draw on for modern clothing design. This jacket is a customized jacket that I did in collaboration with a chain stitch artist friend of mine, Brian Blakey, B. Blakey Designs on Instagram. Brian is one of the most talented chain stitchers that I know. I'm going to explain the source of inspiration for this jacket, then I'm going to explain what chain stitching is and why it's interesting, and then I'm going to show you this jacket. So I was in Ottawa at the Museum of War, and I find war museums are fascinating places for design, mostly because of these customized emblems and patches. When you see old military equipment and uniforms, they are just full of artwork done by the soldiers who wore them, either adapting their squadron or their unit or their service, or just out of boredom, they would customize their uniforms or their military equipment. I saw a World War I camouflage cloak or garment for an early German sniper at the War Museum. Camouflage is fascinating because the military didn't produce camouflage for its soldiers originally. Most early camouflage was handmade and hand painted by the people who needed it in order to obfuscate and hide in high-risk jobs like being a sniper. So it's very, very rare to see early camouflage, certainly from World War I, and super rare because it was mostly hand done. people didn't have standard camouflage patterns like they had developed in World War II. They were mostly done by individuals for their equipment and their uniforms out of their minds, like, this will work, I'm going to paint this, I'm splashing paint all over my garment, and it's going to protect me from being seen and shot. So I thought to myself, wouldn't it be cool to do a customized camo pattern on a leather jacket? And that's how this project was born. Once I started it, I proposed it to Brian, and I said, would it be possible for you to do some really cool chain stitch on the leather? So I sent him leather pieces, and it turns out he could use a chain stitch machine to do custom embroidery on those leather pieces. So what is chain stitch? Back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, there were machines for making what we call chenille crests and chain stitch. These machines do a specific kind of stitch. They work upside down and backwards, and you would draw out a drawing and use different colors of thread, and you would operate these machines and fill in to make either like a crest or a patch for like a stadium jacket, or a design, all by hand, upside down and backwards, using these machines. Now, these companies existed all the way to the 70s and in some cases the 80s, where mostly women operators would operate these chain stitch machines. And if a university, for example, was making all their university jackets for that year, all the crests would be handmade on a chain stitch chenille machine. Or if you were getting a bowling shirt from a bowling club, all the writing and your name might be put in with a chain stitch machine. Or if you got a custom fur coat, they would chain stitch your name inside the fur coat. Very expensive item, it deserves a custom name. So these machines, eventually the operators got old, it wasn't worth paying them, and were replaced by digital machines that created crests and patches and embroidery. Those digital machines were very cheap. You would just scan an image, it would interpret it, it would automatically load up the threads, and that's how these things are done today. But in that transition, the beautiful human handmade artwork and hand stitching component of operating the machine, the very variables and things that make chain stitch an art form, were lost. So the last thing I'm going to say about chain stitch and embroidery is that when the Allies invaded Japan, there was a tradition of the Sukajan jacket. Some people say Sukajan, Sukajan, but these were basically satin souvenir jackets or silk souvenir jackets in which the locals would hand embroider graphics of dragons or eagles with a map and the location of where you were serving after the war to send home to your loved ones. These military jackets were extravagantly beautiful works of art and highly collectible. So when I proposed this collaboration with Brian, my job was to hand create the camouflage on the leather, and Brian's job was to hand create a kind of Sukajan, a souvenir jacket embroidery on the leather, so that it became the equivalent of like a World War I custom handmade camouflage leather jacket with hand custom embroidery. For Brian's part of the work, he chose some very graphic Vietnam era embroidery that he had collected images of in his archive of original souvenir jackets. And for my part of the work, I chose to replicate a Canadian handmade camouflage from World War I. And the results are super artistic and creative. Now, we didn't make this jacket with the hopes of selling a ton of these. In fact, whenever I do art pieces like this, I usually don't expect to sell the jacket. This one I've had for 2 years, and to be honest, no one has really been that interested in buying it. But what it is an incredible showcase of the kinds of things you can do when you run a small brand and you can create art. And at this point, a couple brands have already copied the concept and used digital machines to create sort of fake leather souvenir style jackets. So it's, as usual, nice for me to know that I'm an inspiration for other people to replicate my brand ideas. But I have to say that this is an exceptional work of art. So I'm going to show you the jacket, and I hope you enjoy it. Now, we used my Excelsior model, which is a 1930s, 1920s A1 style jacket. So sort of a Cossack jacket, shawl collar. It's a very basic jacket. It would have been very typical just after World War I all the way to World War II, this style of jacket. The jacket itself is already talked about in some of my videos. This one was made out of a vegetable tan Italian steerhide, so a naked steerhide, and has original 4-hole melamine buttons from the 1930s. And I used a World War II frog skin camo. So there's elements of World War I, World War II, and Vietnam War all in the jacket, which may sound crazy, but I think this has like a real feel of like 80s hip-hop rapper style jackets that were a lot bigger and boxier, but like maybe the early days of Avericks. Okay, so this is the jacket. This is the front. So I layered spray paint and dye to create this sort of translucent camo, and I used a solvent to remove dye and add spray paint. So it's a combination of aniline leather jacket dye, spray paint, a clear coat, solvent remover, and then multiple layers to create the camouflage effect. I did each panel before the jacket was sewn, and I tried to match the patterns on the panels by laying them out and making sure that the camouflage wrapped around even past the seam allowances. And as you can see, Brian did these killer devil heads, which were a classic sort of military symbol from multiple wars. There's always this sort of ominous cultural reference of devils because of the general nihilistic experience of soldiers in war and killing. There's always this sort of contrast between the devil and the angel. So that gives you a really good and beautiful example of what the camo looks like up on the front. And now I'm going to show you the back, which is the coup de grace. Again, the 1968 is on the front, and then the back is one of those nihilistic expressions typical of the Vietnam War, with a graphic of the devil and his kill list. While this is morbid, it has quite a authentic and beautiful artistic quality to a document in history. And I don't like to think about the morality of war era artwork so much as I like to think about the humanity of the people that made it and the kinds of historical conflicts that they would have gone through, having been subject to their government's will to go fight militarily for whatever cause, just or unjust, that they were in. And often you see this artwork reflect that tension between the politics and the reality of war on the ground versus the societal politics of why people are there. So again, I feel that the camo I created on the leather is really effective and very authentic to that early World War I camouflage, and Brian's hand-done chain stitch is immaculate and a perfect representation of chain stitch from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. He even uses a vintage machine. As you can see, it says, "We are the unwilling, trained by the unskilled to do the impossible for the ungrateful." It's a perfect expression from the Vietnam War describing the political reality that draftees were sent poorly trained to go do and win and kill in a war that they necessarily didn't understand why they were there, and then were caught up in the political turmoil upon their return to the U.S. So there you go. This is a camouflage chain stitch Excelsior jacket. If you enjoyed this video, follow me on Instagram, Himel Bros, or my YouTube channel, Himel Bros Leather, and I'll try and get you some close-ups of this jacket as well. Thank you.